So recently, I unfortunately got into this game called Destiny 2. It was a good break from the rigidness of Counter-Strike with an engaging PvE sandbox and one of the worst PvP experiences that I've ever had to endure. But perhaps my biggest takeaway from the game was something that one of my friends said during one of our sessions. My favorite part about Destiny 2 is that there is no game like Destiny 2. My least favorite part about Destiny 2 is that there is no game like Destiny 2. As a new player to the franchise, I objected to this sentiment because I always felt like the PvP gunplay felt like playing Apex Legends with aspects from other games. But as a Counter-Strike enthusiast, that got me thinking, what makes Counter-Strike unique? How has the franchise survived for nearly 2.5 decades now, and what makes Counter-Strike Counter-Strike? Psst, hey kid. This video is sponsored by SkinsMonkey. SkinsMonkey is a 24/7 online trading service for CS2 that is extremely easy to use. You just select your skins that you want to trade, the skins that you want to trade for, and they'll send you the offer. Right now, they're offering up to a 30% bonus on your first deposit, and up to 35% if you use my code WAZOO at the top, along with an additional free $5 if you make a trade worth $100. That's a lot of free money. Check out SkinsMonkey today and use my code WAZOO. Thank you, SkinsMonkey. If I had to think of one word to describe Counter-Strike, there is no word more apt than consistent. For better or for worse, Valve does not update the game frequently, especially compared to other competitive shooters. However, one of the advantages of not having the game be updated that often is that it makes Counter-Strike extremely easy to return to. While other games have been out for a fraction of the time that Counter-Strike has been out, not only do they look nothing like they did when they first launched, but some of them don't even feel like the same game when you play it. Compare this to Counter-Strike, where the game fundamentally feels like the same game even across iterations. But a game that doesn't constantly bring something new will eventually lose player interest as new games come out to either offer new experiences or to directly compete within the genre. But Counter-Strike as a franchise managed to last more than 2 decades now, and it all has to do with gameplay and mechanics. However, we have seen a ton of games with cool gameplay premises and mechanics that died just months after they exploded in popularity. So what makes Counter-Strike different? To answer this question, I think we have to start from the beginning and look at the creation of Counter-Strike and what influenced its gameplay. After all, Counter-Strike began as a mod for the original Half-Life. A lot of the core elements that separate Counter-Strike from the rest of the modern esports shooters stem from this very early era of gaming, where the technology was far more limited and the genre of first-person tactical shooters was not quite developed. One of the most notable aspects of these older games was the insane amount of acceleration and deceleration for movement. There's a reason why people compare this kind of movement to ice skating, as there is a hilarious amount of post-travel after you release a key. Although this was originally supposed to add a sense of realism to the movement by not making movement instantaneous, like how it is in real life, most games today have enough sensibility to tone down this mechanic quite a bit, or completely do away with it. Counter-Strike, however, still offers a moderately high amount of acceleration and deceleration for movement. Not quite as high as it was in its original beta, but still a considerable amount than other games today. And it's the catalyst of what makes the balance between movement and accuracy work. Back in the ancient era of 1998, when Ming Lei and Jesse Cliff made the first Counter-Strike mod, the genre of multiplayer first-person shooters was dominated by arena shooters. Games like Quake and Unreal Tournament offered a fast-paced, action-packed experience where lightning-quick movement and constant fights led to an engaging contest of who was the better mechanical player. Counter-Strike was different because it slowed down the pace and gave a separate objective to the game other than just fragging out, introducing another layer of tactics and strategy that are disconnected from pure mechanical prowess. Additionally, one of the most defining characteristics of Counter-Strike was made to be the antithesis of arena shooter gameplay, which is the fact that you have to stop moving to be fully accurate. This made players have to be more cautious about how they approach gunfights and added to the realism of the game, which might sound silly knowing what Counter-Strike would eventually become, but that sense of tactical realism in a first-person shooter was definitely a draw during this time. And this still deviates from a lot of modern games that would prefer skillful movement expression to promote graceful and artful dodging within gunfights, while Counter-Strike's movement skill relies on your ability to get to zero velocity as fast as possible. There are still a ton of iconic movement techs that I'd be murdered for if I didn't mention them, but in terms of gunfights, most duels in Counter-Strike boil down to that singular moment where both you and your opponent react to each other, and it all comes down to who hits their shot first.
Oh, get it done.
And that's another thing about the movement. If you force players to stand still while shooting, but have a long time to kill, or TTK, it just becomes an uninteresting war of attrition. So in order to negate this, Counter-Strike's weapons center around instantaneous kills, whether it be a one-tap headshot or the one-shot body shot of the AWP. And if you ever play Counter-Strike, you know how satisfying it is to absolutely obliterate someone without even giving them a chance. But what ultimately differentiates Counter-Strike from other games that also center around instant TTKs is the balance around guns that don't have one-tap potential. All tactical shooters inherently suffer from a phenomenon called defender's advantage, where the number of angles that an attacker can appear from is always going to be fewer than the number of angles a defender can potentially play from. Although Peeker's advantage due to ping differences somewhat alleviates this, it's not enough once you integrate off angles into the equation, generating even more spots for the attackers to clear. This means that an attacker is always going to have an inherent disadvantage in the information game. One way to solve this is by giving players utility to throw off the defenders, which Counter-Strike does provide. However, since defenders get the same utility as attackers, they're equally prepared to counter your attack. The way that Valorant and Siege decides to balance this is by still allowing both defenders and attackers to have weapons that can one-tap headshot their opponents, but also giving players the opportunity to get safe information with their utility. As a result, a lot of the early game in Valorant and Siege centers around the attackers gaining information on defender locations with their utility, as it is much easier to scout out and attack mismatches in utility or numbers. But these abilities can often fall into the pitfall of being too good at obtaining information, making gunfights feel completely unfair as you get shot through walls without any counter. Counter-Strike players do not get these abilities, so in order to balance this, the defenders, the CTs, get fewer one-tap options in their gun selection. This way, the attackers have the gun advantage, while the CTs get the position advantage, evening out the intrinsic disparity between both sides, but still allowing for an engaging early round attacker phase where your method of gaining information is by taking map control and facilitating gunfights with your body, allowing the defenders to have an opportunity to fight back. But it's not all mechanics. Counter-Strike is a game about strategy, and if there's nothing to alter the map or angles in your favor, the game would get pretty boring. Every modern FPS will have at least some amount of utility. Some will have a lot more ability spam than Counter-Strike, and others will be a little bit more minimalistic. But a principle that Counter-Strike adheres to that is different from other games is the idea that everyone is equal in utility kit, very much so inspired by Quake. This kinda gets lost when you begin discussing the different weapons that CTs and Ts get, and the fact that incendiary grenades and molotovs are now meaningfully statistically different. But the original concept that everyone has access to the same tools is still mostly true, especially compared to other games that have adopted a class or character-based shooter model, where everyone has a specialized toolkit that they play with based on what character they select. And this significantly affects how roles are distributed and perceived in their games. One character's toolkit might be more specialized in defensive purposes, while another favors a more aggressive playstyle. One character might have access to long-range weapons, while another favors CQC. In these games, your character's toolkit inherently affects what role you fulfill on a team. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't play a role that your character doesn't specialize in, but their toolkit would be actively working against you rather than helping.
Somebody tell me that Jimmy is not the problem on this map.
However, since every player in Counter-Strike has access to flashes, molotovs, smokes, high explosive grenades, and decoys, players are not differentiated by what utility they have, but solely by what their playstyle is. And even then, these roles are mostly arbitrary ways to explain what a player's job is in a round, as players can freely switch in and out of roles that they play within a given round, without feeling disadvantaged by their toolkit, as everyone has the same one. But perhaps what makes Counter-Strike so unique has nothing to do with the gameplay. The biggest element that being a mod of Half-Life bestowed is the spirit of customizability. It's easy to forget just how much of Counter-Strike is community curated, from most of the maps not originating from Valve to a whole community workshop that you could take new maps from, to something even as simple as the luxury of hosting your own online server. Of course, this isn't all sunshine and rainbows, as allowing accessible community-created content allowed for a ton of exploits to make it through to the base game. But I think we can all agree that having community-created content being such an integral part of the gameplay experience is ultimately a net positive for the Counter-Strike franchise. Oh, and a replay system. It's kind of shocking how few games have a proper replay system, despite it being one of the most useful tools in Counter-Strike. But that's all I have for today. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I'll see you guys very soon.